Well, welcome everyone on Zoom. And I can see none of your faces. It's kind of a funny gathering. But it's good to be with you all. And thanks for joining me to learn a little bit about the Mikvah. And last year at this time, some of you were there and joined me in learning about the Mikvah and immersing. For some of you, it was the first time. For some of you, it was not. But I'm really glad to be doing this again at this time because the mikvah really can be so powerful in general and in particular around the high holidays. And it's an ancient tool that we, I think, have given over to parts of our Jewish community that are more observant. We seem to have given it over and said that, maybe it has nothing to do with us, in the conservative world, in the reform world, and, in our denominations, because we've limited mikvah to a particular understanding of it that has to do with women and menstruation and family purity, and those are pieces of what mikvah is. Certainly, they're important pieces of what mikvah is, but they're not the whole story, and they're also different ways of connecting to those concepts that I think can be off-putting for many of us. So over the next hour or so, we're going to explore mikvah as a tool for spiritual renewal and rebirth. And then more specifically, we're going to look at that concept around the high holidays as it applies to mikvah. And we're going to be both reading Jewish texts and also exploring mikvah imagery. In particular, we're looking at photographs. You can see on the document, there are different photographs from this project called the Mikvah Project, which was, it's an older project from 2001 by Janice Rubin, who's a photographer. And this is sort of at the very top of the page, a little description of what the Mikvah Project was and is. It's a touring exhibit of photographs and interviews documenting the resurgence of the Jewish rite of immersion in a ritual bath. The ritual of immersion has been observed continuously for over 3,000 years. Mikvah immersion, as a religious obligation, has long been held as sacred, that some have risked imprisonment or death to maintain the practice. The Mikvah Project documents a return to this long-hidden ritual and the powerful discoveries that come along with that process. Mikvah becomes a way to explore the subject's lives. And this particular project, we're going to be talking about mikvah not so much in a gendered sense. I know a lot of the time we think about it as having to do with women. Again, I see more people joining, so I'm just going to re-share the document. We think about this as having to do only with women, which is not the case. I think it has become increasingly associated with women, but it was equally shared by men and women in ancient times. This project in particular focuses on women and their experiences, and there were different interviews with these women and photographs of them in the mikvah that don't show faces or anything too crazy, but the way the exhibit worked is that the photograph, underneath each photograph would be a line from the interview. And so we're going to be sort of tracing that as we move through our learning. I'd love to know, just from everyone who is here, if you've ever immersed in the mikvah before. Like, what's your experience with mikvah? Yes, Tybal.
So I have three kinds of experiences. One, I didn't immerse, but I was leading, going to teach on mikvah, and I'm in Maryland outside Washington, D.C. And at that point in time, we did not have a mikvah that was not run by Orthodox. So I visited 6 local mikvahos just to understand and then teach. And then, I don't remember which order, I've been to Mayim Chaim and Newton. But I also was part of a Rosh Chodesh group that used to meet on Rosh Chodesh at Adas Israel, which is a very large conservative synagogue in Washington, D.C., and built a mikvah. And the one stipulation we have is we weren't allowed to immerse together. So we would take turns to immerse and then have a study session. So, oh, and I actually take it back. I have a fourth where for a certain life cycle moments in my life, I went to that mikveh at Addis Israel. So 4 different kinds of things.
Wow, thank you. Those are, I know some of those spots, Addis and Mayim, which is sort of held up as the model for how mikvah is being reclaimed, by many of us in the non-Orthodox world. And it's an incredible mikvah. If you ever have the chance to visit, if you're ever in Boston, the Boston area, it's an unbelievable mikvah facility. Other experiences of mikvah in the group? Or any particular curiosities about mikvah? Like what do people think of when they think of the mikvah? What are your associations? Well, we'll get to more talking hopefully soon, but just keep that in mind. Think
I
about,
guess I'll pipe up.
great.
When I was in the process of mourning both my parents, so I think it was someone in synagogue suggested I actually consider it because of what I was going through, but I didn't actually follow through. So no, I've never been doing it.
So that's important, which is mikvah for reasons that maybe we don't think are traditional, right? It's not associated with nida, which we'll talk about. That's menstruation and family purity, right? Those are sort of where I might go and thinking about what mikvah is for. But a lot of the way that it can be used and is being used is when we're in moments of transition in our lives, whether that's a joyous moment or a moment of grief, and we need to mark something that we're feeling emotionally, and we want to do something embodied to really mark that difference. The mikvah is a really incredible tool for that. And so the mikvah in Cleveland, there's one egalitarian mikvah in Cleveland, the Charlotte Goldberg Community Mikvah, where if you want, next week, you can have the opportunity for a 20-minute immersion. You can look on the site and sign up if you're interested, because what that mikvah has all of this book of different things that you can say when you're in the mikvah, different reasons people might go in the mikvah, and that are not traditional, that are for our own spiritual wellness, and a lot of it, if it's after a loss, that's something a lot of people are encouraged to go to the mikvah for that reason, to really mark that transition. But it also, if you've never been in the mikvah, then it can be a daunting thing. And it can be intimidating. But that's a great example of maybe a non-traditional reason that we encourage use of mikvah today for moments of transition, moments of marking. Yeah.
I once attended a friend's gathering who was getting divorced, and that's how she decided to get rid of whatever. And she immersed, but we stayed in the outer room, and she had sweets for us, and that's how she used the mikvah.
Beautiful. The beautiful use of mikvah. Divorce, which I'll say the ritual of divorce in Judaism is difficult. Divorce is difficult. And the ritual itself is often a very difficult one to experience, of giving and receiving the get, which is the Jewish divorce document. And something that might feel more cleansing, after an experience like that is mikvah, of like, what does it mean to be reborn as a person not in this relationship in the same way anymore? What sort of defining yourself anew, and closing a chapter. It's a really beautiful use of mikvah. So just to sort of cover a couple different reasons people might go to mikvah, right? All of these incredible uses of marking moments of transition, of divorce, of loss, of marriage. People go to the mikvah before they get married very often. Mikvah is used for monthly by people who are care about this concept of family purity in Judaism, this concept of nidah. We'll discuss a little bit. Nidah is, it technically doesn't mean anything that has to do with menstruation. But when we think of nidah, that is what we're talking about. We're talking about sort of a status of being separated. Nidah has this root that means separation. And so people, women after like every month who are observant will immerse in the mikvah to sort of mark that status mark that changing status from nidah back into a different kind of spiritual state. And that is sort of the most common use of it. People go to the mikvah before Yom Kippur, and we're going to talk about that. That's also a traditional use of mikvah, to sort of spiritually cleanse ourselves as we approach the high holidays where we're supposed to be, having a clean slate. And how do we accomplish that in our soul and also in our body and be aligned in all of those ways? The mikvah, there are a lot of technical things to know about mikvah. What is it? What makes a mikvah kosher? I want to spend just a couple of minutes doing mikvah 101 before we jump into the text and the imagery, but just to sort of be on the same page with what we're talking about when we talk about mikvah. Oh, one other thing that we use mikvah for a lot: conversion. Big thing that we use mikvah for. To mark the change in status from a person who is not a Jew to a person who is a Jew. That is a big moment in the conversion process. So lots and lots of reasons. And the mikvah, which is a ritual bath, we already saw that in the little description from the Mikvah project. It's a ritual bath, and what that means is it can either be a natural body of living waters. It has to be mayim chayim, right? That's the name of the mikvah in Boston that I've always talking about. Mayim chayim, mikvah has to be living waters that aren't stagnant. So a stream, an ocean, a lake that is connected to a spring, any kind of living waters. Living waters, also rain counts as living waters, and rainwater that has been frozen. That's often when we're building mikvahs, because when we're thinking about what a ritual bath looks like, a lot of us don't think, oh, like the ocean, even though the ocean is a perfectly kosher mikvah. And if you ever have the chance to, my mom before her wedding, she did her mikvah in the coldest ocean ever, in South Africa, and that was, that's an experience. If you go to a mikvah that is built and maintained and, often it feels like a spa, it's beautiful. The water is warm. There's this whole getting ready area. It can feel like a real spa experience. But it needs to be built into the ground. It can't just be like a standing hot tub kind of thing. It needs to be built into the ground, and it needs to be connected to living waters. So even if this tub of water that you're immersing in is chlorinated and cleaned, it needs to be connected to a tank. Often it's a tank of rainwater or stream or something that is considered mayim chayim. And there's a little hole between that tank and the ritual bath where the waters kiss. And so that's how the mikvah water becomes kosher living waters, if we're building something and maintaining a structure. And then what it looks like to immerse in the mikvah, we can talk about this then if you decide to do it next week, but generally it's 3 dunks, and you're saying a blessing al hatfilah, one immersion. You're saying you say a blessing after dunking. And you're meant to also have nothing on your body that is separating you from the water. You're not dressed, you're not wearing nail polish, your hair is totally undone, all the dirt, you clean yourself before you go in the mikvah. Nothing is separating you from the water. And so that's sort of a basic Mikvah 101. What is it? What is the mikvah? And how do you immerse? And so from here, I want to sort of go into a larger discussion of mikvah and rebirth, and mikvah and Yom Kippur and the high holidays. So I'd love if we could go to our first text, which is a text by Mary Douglas, who is an anthropologist, and just talks about water as an instrument of purity across traditions. Will someone read for us by any chance? It's Purity and Danger by Mary Douglas, that first text. Anybody?
Give me a second. All right. Let me
Okay.
switch to it. To Windows. In water, everything is dissolved. Every form is broken up. Everything that has happened ceases to exist. Nothing that was before remains after immersion in water. Not an outline, not a sign, not an event. Immersion is the equivalent at the human level of death at the cosmic level of the cataclysm which periodically dissolves the world into the primeval ocean. Breaking up all forms, doing away with the past, water possesses this power of purifying, of regenerating, of giving new birth. Water purifies and regenerates because it nullifies the past and restores, even if for only a moment, the integrity of the dawn of things.
Okay. So there's a lot in there. She packed the punch. What are they talking about? Why water as opposed to other substances? Why water this powerful thing? Why does what does water have the ability to access? I see Tybal's hand.
I think though I focus more on birth than the death that she seemed to focus on. It's because of amniotic fluid. So first, human beings, obviously not accessed in words, but it's a powerful experiential kinesthetic association.
You cut out a little bit for me in the middle there. I don't know about for other people.
Oh, I was just saying the summary: amniotic fluid, so not encoded verbally, not encoded in words, but encoded in sense, memory, kinesthetic motion, maybe proprioception, all of those powerful body memories.
Yeah, right. So it's meant to invoke the feeling of being in the womb. I think a lot of people think about being in the mikvah, in the waters of the mikvah, as being in a womb. So when we're talking about being reborn and a change of status, and you know, in the context of conversion, going from being someone who is not Jewish to someone who is Jewish, it's a rebirth in a sense, and we're really meant to feel that. So that amniotic fluid, that being in this sort of spiritual womb, that's something that water is able to access. Yes. Other thoughts here about like water as this purifying source. Like, is this your experience of water? In general, beyond the mikveh.
Water has both soothing powers, but also destructive power.
Yeah.
And certainly some like folks in Louisiana know something about that.
Point. So often fire is associated with death and water with life, but really both of them are both, and it's all about how. right? Fire is warmth, and fire is so often compared to Torah. Torah is water. Torah is all of these things, right? And also in excess, any of these things are dangerous. Or when there's not enough of it, right? When there's not enough water, the land suffers. When there's too much water, the land suffers. We need a Goldilocks situation with water. And so this life, death, it's a substance of life and death. And that is also such an important point here, because the mikvah is also a place, and I know, Tyler, you were talking about the amniotic fluid, and it calls life more than death, maybe. But I think it's a nexus point. It's really both of those things. And when we're talking about the reasons people go to the mikvah, it's often when people are encountering something like death, some kind of confrontation with mortality, whether that's a moment of bringing life into the world, that there's stuff around status and ritual status and purity when it comes to childbirth. That's a huge moment, and around death, and all of those things come together in mikvah. Moments of transition, moments of life and death, and these substances that are life force substances are really important when it comes to mikvah. Okay, let's keep going now on to the next page, where we're talking about mikvah and rebirth. Firstly, I want to just highlight this photo from the Mikvah project. This is this line below is an excerpt from this woman's interview with our photographer and with the writer who brought this project together. And the way that she understood herself and mikvah, she said, "It's like I die, total stillness, darkness. And when I come up, I am different. In that moment of suspension, I feel uncomplicated and whole." So it's interesting to hear someone say that she feels like she is dying and then coming up different. She's being transformed by mikvah every time she's in it. And so she's talking about this life-death experience. We're gonna read from Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, who's a 20th century American rabbi who put out Kabbalistic commentaries. And he wrote on spiritual purification the following, if someone would read for us. And here I can also, I'll share the screen.
I will if no one else volunteers, but it takes me a minute to, oh wait, you're sharing it.
Yeah.
Spiritual purification, made in heaven, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. The word nida has no implication of dirtiness or uncleanliness. Rather, it comes from the root nadad. I can't see if it's a D or an H, sorry, at the end.
It's a D. Oh.
Meaning removed or separated. The status of nida therefore means that the woman must be removed or separated, and that I'd say she must forego all physical contact during this period. Thus, the word nida does not even have the connotation of menstruation, but of the need for separation. It is important to realize that although the mikvah is often referred to as purification, it is really much more than that. Immersing in the mikvah is considered spiritual rebirth. The mikvah has the power to change a person completely. In many ways, the mikvah represents the womb.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a lot here that's really important when it comes to a discussion of mikvah. So nida, which we talked about just briefly at the very beginning, this is sort of one of the most traditional reasons for using mikvah and why mikvah is still so big today. Nida, when we talk about nida, we're talking about a menstruating woman. Nida is a status that technically, like the language itself has nothing to do with menstruation. It has to do with being separated from the community. And it's very, very important, because when we talk about this with our modern lens, so often this feels kind of icky to people. You know, why are we calling menstruation something dirty, and women are separated? It feels wrong. It's this biological thing. It happens naturally to half the population. How can you be impure? And that language feels really hard for people. And we're going to get in a little bit to what the language of tameh, tahor is, which is pure and impure. But they really mean ritually fit and ritually unfit, because it had to do with temple practice and whether or not you were able to show up and offer sacrifices and be on temple grounds. And that is where a lot of this terminology comes from. And it's not applicable today. But unless it's in the context of family and relationships. But nida means being removed. It means being removed from the community, and purification. It's just a part of what this is. But I am curious about how you feel about purity in general, like this concept of purity. What does it mean to you? And let's start there. Just associations with purity and how you feel about it as a concept. And just know, like, right, we're talking about nida, but there are so many other categories of people that are separated from the community for a particular reason, right? So there's nida, there's any kind of omission. And so certainly for men as well, are occupying this certain status where they're then in need of purification in order to sort of re-enter the community in the way that they want to. So nida is just one, and it's the one that sort of lasted with us today. But there are so many different categories. People who are ill, people who have leprosy, right, have to, in the Torah, there's this concept tzara'at, which we translated leprosy. It's not a great translation, but right, some sort of skin disease that was sort of in ancient times this understood thing. You would need to go purify yourself. So all of these sort of statuses of being ill, of menstruating, of childbirth, of being associated with death, right? Coming into contact with the corpse, you would be required to then go to mikvah, go purify yourself. So all of these different things that separate a person from community. And do you feel that there are times where it makes sense to be separated from community? Is that ever an appropriate thing? Is that ever something that's good and healthy? I feel like so often we talk about the benefits of being in community, especially when we're grieving, especially when we're sort of on the outside, emotionally, physically, or whatever it is. When things are hard for us in our lives, community can be such a gift and such a thing that holds us and keeps us afloat. But then this question of, like, is it ever a good thing to be separate? Because our tradition seems to think, yeah, there are times when you have to be. So what do you think about this? Bible?
You know, the firstborn, I can't, when a teacher's asking and everybody's silent, it's just, I got to go for it. May not be the direction you want to go, but it just made me think of the Amidah, the silent prayer, were in fact everybody separating themselves in a way, but within community.
Mhm. That's lovely. Right, so even in our prayer spaces, like we are so community minded, right? Like, let's just sort of start with that. Judaism is so community minded when it comes to the individual and the community. So often it's the community that comes first. And we have, the Talmud says, like, it's don't separate yourself from the community. Like we're all about being together. We have to make a minyan. We have to be together, 10 people to make a minyan. But even in that space of community, of togetherness, we do make time for being alone with God together, being alone together. It's that is a part of what we do. And there's value in that. There's value in finding our own voice in a group. Okay, just something to think about, because I do think that in a lot of liberal Jewish spaces, we sometimes think of this as like of nida and separation as not a great thing, and it's being reclaimed, and we're trying to understand it in our own time and place and in our own context, and it's not. Nothing is inherently bad or inherently good. There isn't a value judgment. That is important here. There's no value judgment on being of a different sort of spiritual status at a certain point in time. It's natural, it's biological, right? This is people menstruate, people die, people are born. Those are facts of living. Those are facts of living. And there's no arguing that. And Judaism isn't saying this is, this one's bad and this one's good. They just all are. And they all transform us. When we're grieving, we are separate, right? We do feel like we are separated from the community in a certain way, that we're on some different emotional plane, right? That when we give birth, I can attest to this, no, right? Like, you are different. You do feel like you're in a different place. And time needs to pass before you can re-enter the community in a particular way. So I think there's value in sort of reclaiming nida and what it means to be occupying this sort of separate status, and then to re-enter the world and your community really intentionally. This next text by Rachel Adler. She's a Jewish feminist theologian and author. Teaches at HUC, the Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles, and she's writing about these concepts, tameh and tahor, which is pure and impure, fit and ritually unfit. Tahor, fit; tameh, ritually unfit, pure and impure. And she is sort of redefining these concepts. And I just want to look at this really quickly before we move on somewhat, because it's sort of what I've already said, so I'm not gonna just let someone read this, but tuma, she's saying, tameh, tuma, is the result of our confrontation with the fact of our own mortality. It is the going down into darkness. Tahara is the result of our reaffirmation of our own immortality. It is the re-entry into light. Tuma is evil or frightening only when there is no further life. Otherwise, truma is simply part of the human cycle. To be tameh is not wrong or bad, but it is necessary, and sometimes it is mandatory. Right? So she is sort of this is what we were just talking about. That these moments of status change and transition are moments where we are confronting mortality, moments where we're coming into contact with certain life forces. Blood, the seminal emission, whether it's a corpse, whether it's a baby, whatever it is, we're coming into contact with something that is making us face our mortality. Bill, is your hand?
Yes, because I was trying to remember, and given age and everything else, I can't. But when Rachel Adler repudiated this article in her book, Engendering Judaism, I was trying to remember which part of this article she repudiated.
I'm not sure it was this. That's a good question. That's a good question. And Rick, okay, so right, she's a thinker. She wrote this beautiful book, Engendering Judaism. And this is obviously from 1976, and there are some there's some language she may agree with or not agree with anymore, but still I think there's value in trying to understand these concepts, tameh and tahor, in you know, in new ways or in ways that feel more accessible. And I think mortality and immortality are helpful framings because there's something immortal about all of us and there's something mortal about all of us, right? There's it's sort of like the body part of us and the soul part of us. And we are of course, both of those things all the time. But you know, sometimes when we become more body than soul, and I think those are times when our body is acting in certain ways that separate us, that make us nida, or that make us zav or zava, that's when we're having emissions of any kind, or when we're sick, whatever it is, our bodies are sort of taking over, and the mikvah helps us transition back into a balance with soul, with that immortal part of us. This next text from Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz, who's the co-founder of Maharat. She's the first publicly ordained Orthodox female rabbi. Maharat is a very incredible institution that ordains Orthodox female rabbis, or who can call themselves whatever they choose to call themselves, whether that's Rabbah, Rav, Maharat. And she wrote the following, which again, we've sort of talked about this, so I just want to reference it. And just really quickly, we're not going to read it too much, but she's again saying water symbolizes birth. And this ma'im, she looks at ma'im and sees ma'im. So there's ma'im, water, and ma'im meaning what if it's vocalized differently. And she's saying that means it's a nexus of possibility where complete transformation is suddenly imaginable. And then we're not going to look at this so much now, but Ania Diamant, who wrote The Red Tent, she is writing about the mikvah from the perspective of conversion. And this is something that actually is really important that I want to highlight here. I don't want to read the whole thing, but in the middle, she says, mikvah is not about cleansing sins of a rebirth that blots out your life prior to conversion. And yet entering the water does offer an opportunity to redefine yourself in fundamental ways. Since the days of the ancient temple, mikvah has been used to signify changes in status within the community, within personal relationship, and within one's own heart. And I think this is really important in our discussion of high holidays, in our discussion of mikvah. We're not saying that whatever we just were no longer exists. We are, you know, if I'm converting, my previous life no longer exists. That's not the case. If I am, reaching a sort of status of ritual fitness, and because I was nida, it doesn't mean that I wasn't nida and have never menstruated. It's like, right, it's not saying that you weren't ill, that you weren't grieving, that you weren't any of these things that you're trying to mark or move past or move through. But you can redefine yourself. Water is a substance that helps you redefine yourself. And when we're talking about the high holidays, we talk about a clean slate and what that means and what it means to do tshuva. Does that mean when God forgives us, when we are written in the book of life, hopefully, does that mean that all of our past mistakes didn't happen and they disappear when we atone, when we confess, when we, does that mean, what does that mean? We don't really believe in that kind of absolution where it no longer exists and we never sinned and we never did this. We have to our past doesn't disappear. It doesn't disappear when we are praying on Yom Kippur, and it doesn't disappear when we're in mikvah, but we can transform, and that's important to know. And so I want to then move on to mikvah and the high holidays now. So sort of talking about mikvah right now, in this time of the year, right before we think about, moving to this next, moving to the next year and what we want out of it, and reflecting on the year that has happened and where we made missteps and where we went wrong and who we wronged and how to atone for that and everything that this season asks of us. So let's think about the role of mikvah here. And I want to highlight this image from the Mikvah project. And this person wrote in her interview, this is what she said, which is, I have this sense that when you disrobe and go into the mikvah, you're peeling off all facade, all pretense. There's nothing you can hide, not from your sin and not from God. So this sort of embodied ritual, this is an embodied ritual where you go in and you're acting out what you want your soul to do, right? You're saying there's nothing separating me from this water. I am exposed. You're as exposed as you will ever be. You're as unmasked as you'll ever be. You take off all of your makeup and your nail polish and you're cleaned before you go in the mikveh. You are as bare and raw as you will ever be. And your soul is meant to be that way too, right? When we're encountering the divine in this holiday season, we're not hiding from God. We believe that God can see every part of us. And so maybe a helpful thing to get us in the right place, a place that's able to sort of act that out and be that way. During the season, maybe we have to let our bodies do that first. And it can be a helpful thing to go to the mikvah before the high holidays so that, body and soul is aligned here. So let's look at a couple texts that have to do with purifying ourselves on this holiday, on Yom Kippur in particular. Will anyone read from Vayikra, from Leviticus for us? This first text here.
Okay. For on this day shall atonement be made for you, to cleanse you from all your sins, shall you be clean before the Lord.
Great. And so what language in here do you see that feels related to mikvah?
Well, the word tahir is in there, and that's the same root as tahara, which is a cleansing process.
Absolutely, right? Tahara, which there are plenty of other instances in our tradition where water is used to purify, one of which is cleansing the body after death. And this is a process called tahara, where we sort of give the body it's a mikvah in a sense. We pour water on the body and we say tahara hi, like let it be pure. And so this language of tahara, to purify, is very much associated with water. So to cleanse you, right? So God is cleansing us. And if we read this, so that's sort of this a Yom Kippur text that we will read again and again on that day. There's a song associated with it, some of you know it, which is Kiva Yom Hazeh Yachaper Alehem. You know that. But in Mishnah Yoma, we sort of see this more of a connection made between Yom Kippur, between this process of cleansing ourselves, of being cleansed by God, before God, and mikvah. So if someone would read Mishnah Yoma for us.
Rabbi Akiva said, How fortunate are you, Israel? Who is it before whom you become pure? And who is it that purifies you? Your Father who is in heaven. As it is said, and I will sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean. And it further says, O hope of Israel, the Tetragrammaton, name for God. Just as a mikvah purifies the unclean, so does the Holy Blessed One purify Israel.
Okay, what's happening in this text? Does anybody see the wordplay that is happening here? It's most noticeable in the Hebrew, but the English tries to bring it out and make it clear for you. What's the root of the word mikvah? Or what word do you see in there, even if it's not the root? What words? Mikvah itself means collection. When we look at Genesis, when we look at Bereshit, we see mikveh mayim, a collection of waters in our creation story. So mikvah means collection. But there are other things that call to mind too. I see Tyval, your hand.
I mean, it's not quite right, but two of the letters are makom, I think.
Well, three of the letters if you're including the vav, makom. Absolutely, which is both a name for God and a name for place. Anything else? Yeah?
Hope.
Hope. Okay. Tikva. Okay? Tikva means hope. And if you see, this in the Hebrew, in Jeremiah, it says Mikveh Yisrael Hashem. Mikveh Yisrael Hashem. And what that means is that the hope of Israel, Mikveh Israel, the hope of Israel, is God. But the way that this text, what is this text doing then? Because you're right, it's hope. That's the language here. Mikveh here in this verse means hope. But what is happening? How are we transforming this verse to be about the mikvah? So, okay, let's just go back and look at this verse piece by piece a little bit. Rabbi Akiva said, how fortunate are you, Israel? Who is it before whom you will become pure, and who is it that purifies you? Okay, so who's going to purify you? God. How do we know this? What's the proof text? That's what we're looking for here. The proof text is this verse from Yechezkel, as it is said, and I will sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean. Right, so, Umei metaher etchem, avichem shebashamayim, right, shenemar Yechezkel, or mi metaher etchem, v'zerakti alechem mayim tahorim utahartem. V'zerakti alechem, I will throw these pure waters on you, and I will purify you. That's from Yechezkel. And then we take this other verse, another proof text, which is Mikveh Yisrael Hashem. A hope of Israel is God. And we're saying, okay, we're not really meaning hope here. We're going to take that word hope and we're going to say that actually means mikvah. That's a mikvah. Mikvah. God is the mikvah of Israel. God is our mikvah. That's how we're understanding this. So just as a mikvah purifies those who are tmeim, those who are impure, so too does God purify Israel. God is our mikvah on the high holidays. That is how we're understanding this. Our spiritual mikvah, even though mikvah is an inherently spiritual thing, like God is cleansing us. God is our mikvah. reactions to that concept that God is our mikvah on the high holidays. How does that feel? Just something to think about. I think on the holidays, we think of God as lots of things, right? We say Avinu, Malkeinu, our Father, our King, right? God is our Father, God is our sovereign, God is our rock. We have so many different names for God, so many different analogies, so many different symbols that we work into this holiday season and just what we think of when we think of God in general. But to think of God as a mikvah, I think it's different. It's different, and it feels, to me, it feels good. I think lots of us struggle with, what do we think of when we think of God and divinity? What does that look like? Does that look like a king? Does that look like a parent? And for some of us, that feels great, and that feels like, yes, sometimes maybe God does feel that way, and I can relate better to God when I think of God that way. But to think of God as this substance as water, as this thing that envelops us, as a mikvah that, in which we are reborn, and transformed, and sort of this amorphous, substance, that for me, it's a pretty powerful image. But I don't know how that feels for you, and what sort of vision, image, language of God works for all of you, if any.
I think by the end of Yom Kippur, after 10 days of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, I think I do feel cleansed, if you will. I feel renewed. I feel like I'm ready for a new year. I do feel that way.
I love that. So it's by the end of this holiday season, right? I think that's part of it. Like, it feels like such a long holiday season. We have so many different things going on, so many different services, so much repetition of these prayers. And maybe by the end of it, we come out feeling cleansed. Maybe we're immersing ourselves in it. Maybe that's, I think for so many people, it's just, why is there so much? Why is it all at once? Maybe we're being immersed. Maybe we're being immersed in God. Maybe that's what it is. And we come out feeling cleaner and transformed. I want to continue. Just look at this. This is Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. It's a piece of halachic text. It's sort of a recap of the Shulchan Aruch, like a concise version of one of our primary halachic texts. And here we get sort of explicitly, it is a mitzvah for every person to immerse in a mikvah on Erev Yom Kippur to purify themselves from nocturnal emission, and also as an element of repentance, just as a convert is required to immerse in a mikvah. Therefore, even boys and girls should immerse themselves in a mikvah. You should be certain that there is no chatzitza on your body, no particle intervening between the body and the water. So a couple different things happening here, like halachic, right? You are meant to immerse Erev Yom Kippur, and certainly if you're a man and there is the possibility of nocturnal emission that makes you tameh, and what the worry is, right? The Yom Kippur is a holiday. You go to the temple, and you're not ritually fit for the temple if you are tameh, and if you have a nocturnal emission. So for that reason alone, go to the mikvah and be totally spiritually ready for Yom Kippur, for this temple holiday. And then also as mishum tshuva, as an element of repentance, right? It's just, you're going to the mikvah mishum tshuva. It's part of this season of transformation. That it's just part of it. So this more symbolic understanding of the mikvah, right, which is a halachic tool, but it's also a tool that's that's a symbol. We can go when we're grieving, and that's not a halachic transformation. That's not a halachic change in status, but it's spiritual and it's felt. So mishum tshuva, just as a convert is required to immerse in a mikvah, kmo ger, like shanika yer shetzarich tefillah, so that's a change in status. And so boys and girls, so that's sort of bnei mitzvah age, should immerse themselves in mikvah, and there should be nothing separating you from the water, nothing. So here it is explicitly, this association with mikvah and Yom Kippur, and sort of maybe an invitation for all of us this year to find some way to get our bodies ready for this holiday before it arrives. This incredible image, when you're in the water, you're not supposed to be touching any of the walls. Your hair is loose. The water is able to touch every part of you, and you're totally enveloped in it. So it's this gorgeous picture. And then I want to end with this again, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, who we read something of his, but he read something really interesting about water, and I think it's important for understanding it in this season and in general. So if someone would just read this last piece for us to sort of send us off, and then we'll check out the last image.
Okay. One of the most obvious qualities of water is the fact that it is a liquid. Indeed, in a sense, water is the primary representation of the fluid state. In many instances, when we speak of water, we are actually speaking of the fluid state in general. Therefore, the spiritual counterpart of water is very closely related to its property of being a fluid. But what is the main difference between a fluid and a solid? What special property does a fluid have that does not exist in a solid state? The main difference between them involves change. If only solids were to exist, there would be no change at all. The world would be a dead, airless body in an unchanging, frozen state. For change to be possible, the fluid as well as the solid state must exist. We see that water itself represents the change and flow towards God's goal. When people immerse in a mikvah, they immerse spiritually into the basic concept of change itself. A person's ego represents the element of one's permanence, and therefore, when one is totally immersed in the concept of change, one's ego is nullified. Thus, when emerging from the mikvah, one is in a total state of renewal and rebirth.
Thank you, Eric. So here again, right? We talked about, we're sort of immersing ourselves in God. God is our mikvah during the holiday season. And this is also saying when we're in water, when we are in the mikvah, we are immersing ourselves in, not just in water, we are immersing ourselves in change, in the very concept of change. Because water is not just water, it's a symbol. It's a symbol of not being stagnant, of not being permanent, of not being frozen, of movement and transformation, and we are immersing ourselves in the potential to be different, to transform. And that's important this holiday season, right? The nature of water lends itself to the nature of humanity, or at least what God wants from us. God wants us to be open to change. God wants us to be open to tshuva, to the possibility of something different, of something better, of return. And we ourselves need to sort of let our boundaries become less firm around this holiday, to let good things in, to let harmful things out, to let ourselves be changed by this time. And that's something that water allows. So if you choose to go in the mikvah this season, and you're welcome to sign up for an immersion next week, we have different slots for going to the Charlotte Goldberg Community Mikvah. I invite you to come use one of those slots and immerse as preparation for the holiday season, to immerse yourself in the concept of change, to immerse yourself in water, to immerse yourself in God, to really get ready for what this season is asking of us in your body and in your soul. I hope you will come, there's no pressure, you no need to sign up for a Mikvah slot, I'm just happy that you were here learning with me. But whether you come next week or you decide at a later date, you're interested in trying out Mikvah, we can make that happen, let me know. We have this tool in our community, it is pretty powerful. And I thank you all for immersing in this learning with me. I love to talk about it.